Thank you so much for taking the time. This is all very fresh. Can you walk me through, moment by moment, when you knew there was trouble?
We knew there was trouble in the middle of one of the speeches in the electoral counting procedure. Normally, of course, that certification process is a mere formality, but yesterday there were speeches because there were objections, and Arizona was the first state where there was an objection. The speech was ongoing. The senator was interrupted when a security official came to the podium where the presiding officer sits and basically said, "We have a security issue. Everybody please stay in your seats." And he instructed everyone to stay away from the doors. That was a first very alarming sign. And shortly thereafter, we were told to evacuate. People literally rushed out of the chamber. And I remember very distinctly the tears and panic in the face of a young staffer. I tried to reassure that we were in good hands, but we were in a rush, and out of the windows as we went down the hall and the stairs, I saw outside this very violent looking mob, rioters. They were carrying Trump flags and Confederate flags, and I could see that they had, in effect, breached what normally are the barricades.
Did you see any of the protesters and those who had breached the barricades? Did you see them inside the Capitol building?
I never saw them personally inside the Capitol building. We were never that close. Fortunately, senators were taken quickly enough to a location in a different building on the Capitol grounds, an office building, where we stayed in a hearing room that was surrounded by military and police, very heavily armed. So we never saw the protesters, but we saw some of the evidence of their vandalism in the offices that were desecrated, and we heard about what they did on the floor of the Senate in terms of rifling through senators' desks and taking apart some of the furniture and so forth.
We, the viewers, saw some pretty disturbing images of the vandalism, people who were posing for selfies with their feet up on senators' desks, etc. Did you see any of the, the post-breach destruction and vandalism firsthand?
We saw some of the destruction and the damage that was done. And at a point when we were in this safe location, we also began to see some of the TV images. And at that point, it really was brought home. I think there are 2 points where real fear was evident. First of all, exiting the Senate chamber in that rush was a harrowing experience. And then seeing the demonstrators out the window as we walked down the hall and stairs, but later saw the evidence of their destruction on the images of TV, even though we were in a safe place. What was happening in this armed insurrection, a mob assault on the Capitol, was so unprecedented. I never saw anything like it anywhere and never imagined I would see anything similar in scenes of armed mobs destroying property on the Capitol, the temple of our democracy, the symbol of our nation all around the world. And so I think that really took people aback. It really struck people.
Senator, how many of you were sequestered in that hearing room where you waited out the violence?
Just about all of us, all 100 with a couple of exceptions. People who feared some kind of COVID infection because we were fairly close to each other, certainly not 6 feet apart because that was impossible, but virtually every member of the Senate was in that one location. And it was very safe and secure. Food was brought in, sandwiches and sodas. So we felt pretty secure, but I was struck with the determination of people to go back and finish our work, complete the count so that we could certify this election. Our feeling was that in a very immediate way, democracy was under assault, that mob violence was threatening to seek to overthrow the results of the election, overturn the election itself, and that we had a responsibility to go back to that chamber and show the American people we were going to finish the job.
You know, when you're under threat, it is really the great equalizer, isn't it? We all feel very similar. I remember in New York after 9/11, everyone felt on the same team. And I have been dying to find out what the mood and the conversation was between all of these senators from different parties and different philosophies and those who were opposing this action that you were voting on last night. What did you talk about?
First, Ashleigh, there's more camaraderie than you might anticipate among us, even though we are of different parties. So we were sort of extending and renewing some of the relationships that existed already. But there was a remarkable esprit, a sense that we were all in it together as we were. And we all wanted to get back to do our job in the midst of those pretty rudimentary sandwiches and sodas. We were also talking about how absolutely staggering this mob violence was and how abhorrent, repugnant, and how shocking it was. So there was that common bond, but also the sense that we were about to begin a new Congress. Think of it for a moment. We were beginning a new Congress just 3 days after many of my colleagues were sworn in for the first time. So this was their introduction to the United States Senate. And I joked with a couple of them, you know, things were fine before you got here. There was a lot of good humor and esprit de corps in the face of the threat. By that point, we felt pretty safe and secure. But going down that tunnel, having evacuated the chamber, there was a sense that we really needed to move quickly and urgently.
At any point in your conversations, certainly in the early offings of that sequestration in the hearing room, were there any fingers being pointed? Today, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the 25th Amendment. Nancy Pelosi's now discussing impeachment if there isn't action taken on the 25th Amendment. Was there any conversation as to who is to blame? And were there any voices suggesting it was wrong to point the finger at the president?
Great question. First of all, there were a lot of doubts expressed about the planning and preparation, because obviously those thugs, and they really were thugs and rioters, could be seen coming to the Capitol. And the president spoke to them, inciting and instigating the riot that took place. So the question is, why wasn't it anticipated, especially after the very major response to other protests that we've seen by the National Guard, by the FBI, by other law enforcement, by the military. And so a number of my colleagues raised those questions. And I believe there has to be an investigation by the Department of Justice into why the response was so lax and lagging, how the breaches could have happened, and why the preparation seems to have been so inadequate, and the response flawed. Second, so far as the president, there was a real sense that the president fueled these rioters and the physical damage and injury and tragic death by his very incendiary remarks at the ellipse, but also before it, because the president has said consistently since the election that it was stolen. He's used the fantasies and falsehoods to fuel the sense of grievance and anger that was expressed when those armed rioters broke windows, entered the Capitol, destroyed, vandalized, injured. And so I think a number of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle felt that the president bore very, very significant responsibility and ought to be held accountable. I personally believe he's unfit to hold office. He should be removed. The 25th Amendment should be invoked. The quickest and effective way to assure that he is no longer a danger to the American people or democracy is to invoke the 25th Amendment, or alternatively, for him to be impeached, and my Republican colleagues in the Senate should join with the House members to ask that he be impeached. But the danger to democracy, I think, was very deeply felt. And the third point, I was struck when Joe Biden gave his remarks, which were very calming and assuring, but at the same time, imploring responsibility for the rioters to stop and go home, and for the incitement to stop. And there was applause at the end of Joe Biden's speech. And when the president, by contrast, Donald Trump, gave his remarks about these rioters being, I think he used the term, special people, and this day will be remembered, seeming to praise it, there was a lot of head shaking.
Well, Ivanka Trump deleted, I believe, a post calling them patriots and asking for peace. Understandably, it's been deleted because I don't think anybody in his or her right mind would consider someone who would do this a patriot. You may have an opinion, and that's fair, but laws are laws. And you are the top law enforcement officer in Connecticut. I want to talk a little bit about the prosecutions going forward. This, by many definitions, is terrorism. Terrorism can net a life sentence for many, 20 years for many I've seen myself. What kind of punishments should some of these well-identified protesters who did what they did at the state capitol, what should they face? And will they face it? And will they be prosecuted by the Attorney General who's responsible for the district?
I believe that the incoming Attorney General ought to not only investigate the response by the security forces that are responsible for protecting the Capitol, but also ought to prosecute vigorously the individuals responsible for this violent assault on the Capitol. There can be all kinds of charges. They all bear serious prison punishment. And if convicted, that kind of punishment should be imposed. The director of the FBI has already stated that there will be investigations anticipating prosecutions, and if convicted, those individual culprits ought to be given serious sentences, not just a few days or a month, but as a deterrent to this kind of mob violence and assault on institutions of our democracy. They should be given serious prison terms.
You know, I don't want to get too in the weeds, but the truth is that the definition of felony murder is if you are in commission of a crime and a death happens, you can be charged and convicted of felony murder. And this was without question the textbook definition of a conspiracy. These people together in concert in furtherance of crimes as they went along and breached the Capitol and caused the vandalism they did and caused the terror that they did and the security issues for the senators. Felony murder is a life sentence I'm assuming, in the District of Columbia as well. However, there is a very strong message that would send to Trump supporters all throughout the country who didn't breach the Capitol but still have their philosophies. Where is that line where you need a strong punishment to fit the crime, but you don't want to go so far as to alienate further an extraordinarily polarized country?
The punishment really has to be assessed by the sentencing judge based on the intent and all the circumstances. I've been a federal prosecutor, United States attorney in Connecticut, and I served for 20 years as state attorney general. Sentencing is one of the most difficult and important tasks that a judge performs. I think judges will recognize that these federal crimes, they are not just District of Columbia crimes, whether it's conspiracy, racketeer, influence, corrupt organization known as RICO, other kinds of violations of federal law, felonies, because there was not only destruction of property, but injury to individuals and tragically deaths. And our hearts go out to the loved ones and families of people who lost their lives. But the consequences here ought to match the serious losses and the intent, clear intent, waving Confederate and Trump flags, which were far more prevalent than American flags, and the idea they were trying to overturn an election. It really was an insurrection, a terrorist act. It has to be viewed as an act of terrorism and insurrection.
And you mentioned the flags. I wanted to ask specifically your feeling about the notion that a Confederate flag was raised at the U.S. Capitol.
I think that symbol of the kind of terrorism and insurrection that was their purpose certainly was epitomized by a Confederate flag, as well as the Trump flag, showing who inspired and instigated and really incentivized this attack. Donald Trump, in effect, was trying to overturn the results of the election. He has denied reality and fact, repeating again and again and again that the election was stolen, that he won, that he had way more votes than Joe Biden, even though Joe Biden won by 7 million. And these kinds of fantasies and falsehoods have fueled the insurrection that we saw. The Confederate flag was simply another symbol.
Let's talk about, the big news of the day, and that is that Nancy Pelosi has talked about another impeachment effort. We're mere weeks, days away from the end of Donald Trump's term. Is that A, feasible, possible, doable, and B, is it really necessary at this point with the country as polarized and angry as it is?
I support every constitutional effort to remove Donald Trump from office. Impeachment is one means, and certainly it is feasible in the days between now and January 20, when there will be a peaceful transition of power. But I also suggest and support invoking the 25th Amendment. Donald Trump has shown he's unfit for office. He's unable to discharge the duties of his office, which is the legal criteria under the 25th Amendment. And I'm focused with the most urgent priority on making sure that we have a peaceful transition of power. What happened yesterday in the United States Capitol should be absolutely prevented from recurring later this month when President Biden takes the oath of office, because we need the American people to be reassured that our democracy is sustainable, intact, and thriving, because we have such tremendous tasks ahead. Conquering the pandemic, reviving our economy. We need to turn to life-saving vaccine distribution, a testing strategy, more aid to small businesses, as well as state and local governments, more stimulus payments. There are such urgent tasks ahead for this new administration.
When Joe Biden takes the oath, he takes on a country that is no different on January 19th as it is January 20th. And I think we can all agree that that people who support Trump, people who follow the Trump philosophy across the country, 70 million people who voted for him, are not representative of the people who stormed the Capitol yesterday. What does the president, what do Democratic senators, what do Democratic congressmen need to do to create some unity and healing in this country and create outreach to the people that President-elect Biden has said he will be the president of all people, them included? What does he need to do? What do you all need to do?
We need to address the real needs, the tangible challenges, a spreading virus that now is showing new variants, even more transmissible. We need to provide vaccines and create trust and confidence so that people will use those vaccines and make them available much more widely, free, and more testing. A feeling of safety and security in our society that will enable people to go back to restaurants and retailers, reopen our economy, and deal with the fundamental disparities in wealth and income that are growing, the differences in opportunity that are fueling grievances in the midst of a pandemic and an economic crisis. We also have a racial justice movement that needs to be addressed, not just in policing, but housing, education, healthcare, and other opportunities. These needs are real. People are hurting. I go around the state of Connecticut to the food lines where people are in their cars miles long in lines. They've never before asked anything of anyone. These challenges are new to them, but people are hurting all across America, and our economy, our healthcare is very much at stake here.
Without question, I don't think anyone would disagree with you. There is the notion that pre-pandemic, Donald Trump had legions of supporters, and it's a philosophy. It's almost it's a way of life. It's a belief now, and it doesn't have anything to do with the food line. What overtures can Democrats, who now ostensibly are going to control all three, of the extraordinary powerful elements of government, what overtures can they make to the 70 million who feel forgotten, who feel left out, and who feel that Trump was their only hope? They're not going away.
The people aren't going away, but the fantasies and falsehoods need to be abandoned. And it is a challenge to dispel some of those falsehoods and fantasies, as many as possible. The idea that Donald Trump won the election and it was stolen. Maybe there will never be full acceptance of the truth that Joe Biden won and won those states, even after the challenges that were made in 80 court cases, the certifications and recertifications and recounting. But we need to unite behind those ideals and goals that are American right now: conquering the pandemic, providing more economic opportunity, reviving jobs. And I think getting the job done in those areas should bring us together on a bipartisan basis in the United States Senate, which will be so evenly divided, 50-50, with the vice president breaking ties when they occur. But nothing will get done unless it's bipartisan. That's a basic truth in the United States Senate generally, especially now. Nothing will get done unless we come together on a bipartisan basis. I think we have some common ground. We need to broaden it.
You talked a little bit about security in our earlier question, but I want to dig a little deeper on that. That seems to be one of the big headlines today. A, where was it in advance? Where was the planning? And B, when glass was shattering, why did it take so long for a strike force to actually arrive?
The lagging and lax security, the failure to respond more quickly and comprehensively, is very much a question that needs to be investigated, not just by the Congress, but by the Department of Justice, that can look into what the Department of Defense did or failed to do, what the FBI did or failed to do, what the DC police should have done differently, and the Capitol Police, each of them bears scrutiny. And the question of the day is why security was so lax and lagging. And I'll just give you one example. One of my colleagues said that he was in contact with Department of Defense officials at the highest level saying, you better be out there tomorrow. It was the day before. So a lot of people knew it was coming even a day before. And obviously on that day, those marchers were very much in physical evidence. You could see them coming. And the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and others should be assessed.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard calls already today for a firing of the sergeant at arms, but will things look different, going forward on a day-to-day basis, knowing now this has happened, it is possible? And then there's January 20th. What are the plans?
Firing the sergeant at arms who works for the Senate is maybe a start to achieving accountability, but the inquiry has to be much broader, to include all the Capitol Police, all the law enforcement, including the Department of Defense, because all of them really should have been involved in a whole of government response. The situation was so serious, the assault so clearly on the verge of happening, that the response should have been much more adequate than it was.
I've seen one congresswoman say today that she doesn't feel safe today. Do you?
I feel safe. I really feel that we've been through a very traumatic time, a harrowing threat to our democracy. And I'm in the Capitol speaking to you. I feel safe here. When I left the Capitol last night to drive home, the streets were empty. Everything was peaceful. I think that the Capitol now is safe.
Elaine Chaos put in her resignation today, and I'm wondering if you think that, what you think of that, because some are saying a little too late. Some are saying, well, wouldn't you prefer to stay around for a vote on the 25th Amendment? Others are saying, why would you do that? What's the point? There are only days left until the end of the president's term. What are your feelings?
It's a symbolic gesture. And what I would say is that a lot of my Republican colleagues in the United States Senate have been enablers. They've been silent. They failed to stand up and speak out when Donald Trump again and again and again demonstrated his contempt for the rule of law and for the law itself in what he said about the Charlottesville wannabe Nazis, in his obstruction of justice, in his self-enrichment, in violation of constitutional prohibition. Again and again, they remain silent. Words matter. Silence can matter as much as words. And rather than talking about members of the cabinet who could have or should have resigned earlier, I think that we ought to focus on, more broadly, political leaders across the country, Republicans, and some of them colleagues in the Senate who have remained silent.
Has your relationship changed among your fellow senators on the GOP side after being huddled together for a couple of hours and under, unified threat?
I think our relationships are in the process of changing because Democrats are going to be in the majority. And we all know that in the course of our time here, there are years when we're in the majority and years in the minority, and there are different outlooks and perspectives involved. But I do think yesterday was sort of a coming together. We shared a common experience of threat and determination, and I am hoping we can build on it in this new Congress.
Do you think that the experience you went through, huddled in that hearing room, huddled for your lives, changed the opinions of those senators who came out and did change their vote on the floor?
I think a number of senators who were going to vote in favor of the objections at least changed their positions. Whether they changed their minds, I can't say, but I think that the harrowing nature of that experience, showing the logical conclusion of Donald Trump's inciting and instigating violence, certainly was extremely sobering. It got their attention. And I think it showed where these objections could lead. And let's face it, Donald Trump is an incompetent would-be dictator. He's inept, but he is normalizing a path that others could take, more competent and effective would-be tyrants. And that's part of the real danger here. And I think that fact was brought home to some of my colleagues.
Donald Trump may be leaving the White House on the 21st, but Donald Trump is not leaving America, and his 70 million voters are not leaving either. What is the path forward in governance, knowing full well that there are those people who still will follow when Donald Trump tweets? What happens with Democrats? What happens with your fellow Republicans who are worried about being primaried? What's the new metric in governing and in campaigning?
First, I think Donald Trump has really greatly stained his legacy as well as the office of president. He has so destroyed his credibility with at least some of those 73 million voters. And I also believe that it's on us now, all of us on both sides of the aisle, to get stuff done to address this pandemic and conquer it, to revive the economy and put America back to work. That is what the way that we can reach those voters who favored Donald Trump. But also remember, this time is very different, but there are elections that are closer than this one. 7 million votes is a big margin for a presidential election. And Joe Biden won by 7 million votes. He took 306 electoral votes. Donald Trump called that victory when he had those same number of electoral votes a landslide, even though he lost the popular vote. And I think Joe Biden is aware of the need to reach out. I think that's key. Reach out. The key is to reach out, to listen, to address those needs. Actions speak louder than words. And listening is something we need to do in these coming months and years. I believe listening is probably the most important thing anybody in elected office or any office does. I tell my children that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth so that maybe we do a little more listening than talking. I have made it a mantra. I go around the state of Connecticut attending parades and fairs and town halls and all kinds of events because it's a place where I can really listen to people. Unrehearsed, unvarnished, what they feel and know, and it helps me. It's essential to my doing my job.
Maybe that's the first thing the new President Biden after January 20th will do as well, a big listening tour in the places where he's promising to be the president of all Americans and not just his own supporters. Senator Blumenthal, thank you for giving us so much time. I've so appreciated our conversation. I hope it's not our last.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you, Ashleigh. Thanks.
Thank you.